personally a believer that a company could launch a game and have a $20 NFT that users could mint at any time and see more long-term value and growth than someone who launches a game and does the whole 10,000 PFP NFT collection and thinks that that's how you're going to onboard gamers. The idea is, how do you reach as many audiences, not how you segregate audiences based on some level of like, exclusivity or ownership, I think.
Hi, everyone. It's Jordan from the NEWFORUM team. NEWFORUM is a community podcast that invites purpose-driven leaders, visionaries, and creators to spark accessible conversations on the topics of crypto, the metaverse, NFTs, and everything Web3. So we're very honored today to have as a guest Bryce Johnson, known as Brycent on Twitter, and some even called him the guru of Axie Infinity last year. Brycent is one of the most established Web3 gaming content creators and streamers, as well as the founder of LootBolt, an application created to help Web3 communities gamify engagement on Discord. So I'm looking forward to discuss all things Web3 gaming and for him to share his journey and thoughts on the past, present, and future of gaming. And of course, being a creator in the Web3 space. So welcome, Brycent, and let's start if you're ready.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's cool to be able to chat. I love chatting about gaming and just the entire Web3 community and figuring out how we solve for major problems across the space. So it's cool to be able to have the chat.
Perfect. So I guess the first basic question is like, in terms of introduction, how did you get introduced to the Web3 space and what kept you involved?
Yeah, so I started, I think my journey started about a year and a half ago now. I found Web3 gaming in this entire space kind of through a podcast. It was Andrew Safermian and Koroush AK. They were on his Market Meditations podcast, and they were talking about virtual land and investing. And I think at that time, Axie Infinity was really popular, or it had just started like getting popular. And I found out about it through that podcast, kind of dove in, realized no one was like making content on the game and like making content on the wider Web3 gaming ecosystem in a way that was like entertaining. So when I got into the game, I had no clue or any of these games about the whole financial aspect of making money. It was more so I saw this as like a category of gaming that no one was talking about. So I thought, the foresight of, oh, this could potentially pop off one day. So I started making content blew up, and it put me in a space where I could eventually launch my own company, Loot Squad, which is a holding company for LootBolt, where we raised about $5 million last year with a host of different investors. So my journey started out very much just kind of consuming some content and realizing that this was like a very underserved space, diving deeper and figuring out that, okay, I could develop some sort of company, a brand, and all that cool stuff to potentially do this full time. So thankful with how it kind of started, but it was very much kind of unexpected. Before that, I was a software engineer. So came from a technical background, but didn't have any clue about crypto, Web3, or NFTs. I think the first NFT I ever heard about was like NBA Top Shot. I bought one and I thought it was like the stupidest shit ever. So like, I was just like, all right, well, I'm not going to do anything with this. So I kind of was like, I churned immediately after buying it. I still have those Top Shot. Like, it's like a couple of them, but yeah, it didn't do it for me for sure.
I mean, you can look back at it in the future and be kind of proud. Were you a gamer before? Like, I guess you brought up the topic of like, Web2, Web3. Like, what are really the main differences for you? I know it's a question that's like discussed a lot in the space. Do you see it like as Web2 gaming against Web3 gaming? Because sometimes it feels like new Web3 games are not really acknowledging the success of traditional Web2, right? Games. Like, how do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't see any delineation. I think the only difference is currently in Web3, we have more confusing and difficult ways to do things that were simplified in Web2. The only difference is in Web2, you didn't have the ownership. So, I mean, the ability to sell assets, you currently have that in CSGO. The only difference is you can't sell them legally and like in a way that is like, oh, you have them and own them on chain and Valve can do whatever they want. So there is an aspect or a caveat there where it's like, you don't have the ownership aspect. And that's kind of where Web3 comes in. But I also don't think that it has to be ownership that is represented on chain for it to be truly power to the players or power to the gamers. So I think that like we do get into a point where there's a lot of like Web3 overkill around like how games interact. But ultimately, the whole cliche term is the game has to be good for it to be something that people really want to like play, regardless of if it's Web2 or Web3. I think that's correct. But I mean, yeah, it's true. But I mean, that's something I think of by default. I think like the bigger issues are how do you educate people on Web3 gaming and not, oh, this is like this new world of gaming. No, like how do you tell someone that, hey, you can go on So Rare right now and where you're playing daily fantasy on DraftKings, you can play that, but own your favorite LeBron James digital card and earn not only from winning these different tournaments, but from actually selling the cards in the game. So I think it's like a whole concept of telling these people or telling people that these marketplaces exist in a way that allows them to make money, but then also in a way that allows them to create experiences. I think the big lacking points in web between the differences in gaming is in Web2, gaming experiences are where the value for these different ecosystems are derived. Fortnite is popular, but that is a byproduct of multiple collaborations and game iterations and bringing in Dragon Ball Z and Patrick Mahomes and now Doritos and all these insane collabs that make experiences that are connected to things that we enjoy in real life or outside of gaming or outside of our traditional perspective of what gaming is. In Web3, it's, oh, well, you just can earn money from playing these games and you can do this over a regular job. But no one talks about how retail investors get shafted in the meantime or in the process. So it's a big thing of a lot of like financial aspects that are masked by gaming or gaming face UIs that are just DeFi. And we've had DeFi for a much longer time. So I think like for us to get to a point where gaming is truly like the forefront of Web3, it has to happen in a way that is very, I would say, natural and not forced through this idea of fake money machines being able to print us tokens that imaginarily have value that doesn't currently exist. So I think ultimately the big differentiators are the people that are building, most people building Web3 based games aren't building them for the sake of gaming. It's a lot of just building based on cash grabs and pulling money out of markets, just like early 2017 ICOs. I wasn't a part of them because I wasn't around at that time, but I heard enough from people talking about them to go back and do my own research.
So obviously you mentioned education, and not only in Web3 gaming, but the whole space. It's a topic that keeps coming back. But when you look at gamers, do you think they want to be educated about crypto? Like if we skip, like obviously the goal in Web3 gaming is to onboard every gamer on the planet, ideally, right?
Yeah.
So, when I speak to a lot of friends that are real gamers, they're like, well, I'm not sure about crypto. So first, obviously we need to educate them, but they also need to want to be educated. So how do we go around this whole topic of, some people are here only for the cash grab, others because they're really curious about the game, like looking at your community in general, like how do you interact with these things? Do you like educate your community or are they already in crypto?
It's a combination of like a two-sided prong. Most of the gaming participants that are real gamers have not entered Web3 gaming yet. Most of the people that are currently in Web3 gaming are just investors or speculators or people trying to make money off the games. And that's fine. Like in the early stages, you're going to have that. But it's like if those people are the people that are the first kind of experience that a newcomer has, it's going to create a bad precedent for the space. So I think that ultimately, with the way games are going and educating, I'm not sitting there telling people, oh, you need to download this crypto wallet and do these. Like you're going to lose someone. But the idea is getting them playing games that they enjoy because they're games and then investigating or falling deeper down the crypto rabbit hole as a byproduct of them playing games that they enjoy. That's kind of how I got deeper into, Web3 myself. I like playing Axie Infinity because it was like Pokemon initially. Right. And when I first got into it, I was streaming it just like as if I was a Pokemon trainer. Only difference was I owned the Pokemon and I was like, okay, this makes sense. But as I dove deeper, I learned about DeFi and staking and all these mechanisms, some more malicious than others, about what in Web3 I want to be a part of. And eventually you get to the point where you find the things you like, the things you dislike, and you create a balance. But I think like in the early stages, we're at a space where a lot of that value creation is very much focused on like the monetary aspect. And for us to get to a point where it's sustainable, it has to be focused on gamers enjoying experiences. And as a byproduct of those experiences, them diving deeper. Like to be honest, I didn't buy my first like hardware wallet until like 8 months into my crypto journey. At that point, I was already considered as one of the biggest people in Web3 gaming. And I had been playing Web3 games for 7-8 months in a row. So, and I had launched my startup. We had started raising funding and I still didn't have a crypto wallet. So it's like, regardless of the information that people put in front of me, I wasn't going to pick it up any quicker than I felt like I needed to pick it up. The idea isn't to like force education on people. It's to allow them to find and investigate and pique their curiosities with tidbits of things like fun games that they didn't know they could make money off of and making a couple dollars as a byproduct or owning assets or diving deeper into immersive experiences. So I always go back to the idea that experiences are what will shape Web3 adoption and not monetary aspects or incentivizations.
Yeah, I think the point you mentioned about, you want the gamer to be interested, right? Like if you look at 2000, the MMOs, if you look at 2009 mobile, like with Angry Birds, you look at Pokemon Go, The Witcher, like all these games, they just created a hype, a narrative story, but the game was actually good. So
Exactly.
you mentioned the other day actually on Twitter, I think it was a couple weeks ago, like I'm looking for a Web3 game that I can literally play like hours long and like love it. So where do you think we are right now? Like when you're with your community, obviously do you enjoy playing the Web3 games, or is it more like, well, you had success with Axie and now you're kind of keeping the trend, but how does that look like in terms of your dopamine, your excitement, right, when you're playing?
Well, I think that like it's a combination. You have some games that absolutely suck and then some games that are decent. There's no one game in Web3 that I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, I could play this for 20, 30 hours on end. It's not
Yeah,
at that point.
yes, maybe in a couple
But
of years, right?
yeah, but I mean, it's ultimately a thing of like betting on the category. I like the idea that you can own assets in games. I like the idea that you can have kind of like an upside in owning tokens associated with games, and then those games doing incredibly well. I mean, some of my favorite games like Call of Duty, dude, they released a new game every year. I never had any input on like the weapon skins in the game or kind of like the assets in the game. Like there's certain things about gaming that you don't have any input on, and governance and these different ideology things that allow you to have more input are what really strikes me as like powerful about games. So I think that the category of gaming is like very much behind, but I think that like the whole idea of why the technology is important doesn't change just because one game doesn't pop off or because we're in a bear market. And I also don't think that like the reasons why I got popular are the reasons why I'll be like super impactful to the space. I think ultimately my journey in Web3 is a lot of learning and unlearning. You learn that a lot of things that companies do as a whole are malicious. Like, for example, most games probably shouldn't have tokens. If you would have told me that, like, if you would have said that 8 months ago, I'd be like, why not? Well, now because I look at the space and I'm like, because no game implements governance on the launch of a token, which is like the main reason why games say they're launching a token. No game actually provides users with value for that token outside of speculation and hoping it goes up or down. It actually kills the game's public sentiment if the token goes down in price, because eventually it gets to the point where people are like, I don't want to play this because it's a rug or a scam. And that's association of the responsibility of having a token. So it's like there are things you learn and things you unlearn, and you get to the point where you're like you make your own thoughts around what the ideal gaming project should look like, and that's what we're all striving for. So I mean, from my perspective, it's like I think that my participation in Web3 gaming makes the space 100 times better, and everything that I do is for the sake of growing the space in a way that isn't shilly, a way that isn't scammy, in a way that isn't, oh, we need to go out here and look at how we increase our valuation of our token or our floor price of our NFTs over the course of a week or a month. No, how do you increase user retention for games over the course of multiple years and create a sustainable gaming ecosystem that can rival Fortnite or League of Legends or Minecraft? Not how do we get to a 10 or 15x floor price over 5 months and then that shit dumps the next time we reach another bear market.
Yeah, I think that's the main topic of discussion actually currently is more the different visions for gaming, right? Like
Yeah.
if like there's a lot of different voices that are coming out on Twitter. Like for example, there's Gabriel Layden, like the CEO of Limit Break, and he said recently, and I quote, "My goal is to kill free to play and replace it with a better Web3 powered free to own model." So what are your general thoughts in terms of like play and earn, free to play, free to own? Like obviously everyone is kind of iterating and trying new things. So what are your views on the free to own model?
I mean, I've tweeted, I've made YouTube videos about
Yeah,
how I thought play to earn was
obviously.
dead. So I feel like I feel like there's no need in going back and touching that. I think if anyone is like still thinking play to earn is going to be the future of gaming, you should probably be very like cautious if you're following them. But I think that ultimately the jargon around how all of these games are like kind of these buzzwords, free to play to own, play and earn, play to earn, all these different things. I don't think it matters as much as we try to make it out to be. I also don't think that like the whole prospect of someone raises $200 million to save Web3 gaming is a savior for Web3 gaming. I think that at the end of the day, we're like all these games are building their own gaming ecosystems. Interoperability is not something that is going to be incredibly prevalent the way we think it is, because the IPs don't matter. Like we have interoperability in Fortnite right now, and it's because IPs like Dragon Ball Z and Doritos and NFL and all these different companies working together actually has value. No one, to be honest, no one in Web2 gaming cares about being able to use a cool cat and a bored ape in the same game. It's just the maybe 2,000 people that own that NFT. So it's like interoperability isn't a great selling point. And I also don't think that the whole ownership aspect is a great selling point. I think
Oh, okay.
gaming genres are the selling points. You create a good game for a gaming genre that people want to immerse themselves in, and layering on these cool Web3 based features that solve significant problems are like the value add that Web3 brings. It's not a you're either Web3 or not Web3. It's you're a game that just integrates, in my opinion, Web3 based aspects. So maybe that's ownership of assets in the game, but how does that asset ownership happen? Is it on a chain that is like, fast, as fast as like swiping your debit card? Is it done in a way that gives ownership to everyone, not just a couple thousand users who buy the early NFT and look like whales? Like, you have to take these things into account, because ultimately these are the financial dynamics that change or shape how a game is built and how the game long-term operates and plays. It's not for the 10,000 people who own one NFT. It should be for the couple million of people that get into a gaming ecosystem. I mean, I'm personally a believer that a company could launch a game and have a $20 NFT that users could mint at any time and see more long-term value and growth than someone who launches a game and does the whole 10,000 PFP NFT collection and thinks that that's how you're going to onboard gamers. The idea is, how do you reach as many audiences, not how you segregate audiences based on some level of exclusivity or ownership, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Sorare earlier. There's Cross the Agents, Legends of Elysium. Like a lot of companies that are going into the card NFTs are taking that approach of kind of cheaper NFTs, so have a broader audience. So do you really think, in fact, should we actually not say Web3 gaming and just say it's a natural kind of evolution of gaming in a way? It's just going to progress and implement these Web3 features. Is that how you see it?
I think that the term Web3 gaming is more helpful than the term NFT gaming. I think the term NFT gaming is counterintuitive because people see NFTs as a scam. I think Web3 is a bit more easily consumable, but I think just calling it gaming, okay, if you're releasing a MOBA, you're releasing a MOBA that's going to contend with League of Legends. You're not releasing a MOBA that's going to contend only with the other two MOBAs that are in Web3. You might get funding because of it, but it's your competitors are still the same competitors you had in Web2. You're trying to grab attention from games as a whole, not just games in Web3, because there isn't enough of an audience in Web3 based gaming. And I think people get that wrong all the time. They're like, oh, we're going to be the biggest Web3 based sports game. Okay, but you're not. You're the only sports game in Web3. That's great, but you're not battling against other sports games in Web3. You're battling against Madden and FIFA, just like me as a content creator. Yeah, I'm the biggest Web3 gaming content creator. You can arguably say that, but I'm not battling against the other 7 other big content creators that people care about that are in Web3. I'm battling against the same Web2 content creators, the Ninjas, the Valkyries, the Nate Shots. I'm trying to get viewership from them the same way they're building viewership. So it's we're all in one gaming collective. We just try to separate it as these different layers and thinking that it's this faraway concept. But I will say that Web3 gaming and those who are building a Web3 gaming have a better chance at onboarding Web2 gamers than Web2 gamers have at onboarding Web2 gamers into Web3. Because Web2 gamers that are currently built out in Web2, when they bring Web3 to their audiences, they're going to be immediately seen as, oh, this is just a scam or a cash grab or an NFT. Anytime you look at any major gaming organization that launches an NFT or a token or a social token, all the comments under there, it says, oh, this is a scam or something like that. So that there is that dynamic that comes into play as well.
It's probably a bit naive to think that, at least currently, there's Web3 games saying, hey, we're going to compete, with League of Legends and Riot Games and that kind of stuff. Obviously, it's got hundreds of millions, if not billions. And actually, it looks more like the better chance of Web3 gaming succeeding is actually these companies, as you said, kind of saying, hey, we really like these concepts, either token, the marketplace, whatever, and we're going to implement it into our whole lore and universe. So how do you see actually the companies kind of approaching, the whole metaverse aspect, the Disney recently, Starbucks even, you tweeted about it. How do you see the next years with all the companies kind of coming in and being interested, basically?
I think over time, with more large Web2 companies coming in, they're going to take their current audiences and create their own ecosystems. I don't think the overall audience will become deep Web3 based participants, but they have huge user bases that are already super in tune with their product and being a loyal customer, and they will get those users to step into the space. So that is a great plus. But I do think ultimately we all have to look ourselves in the mirror and say, okay, games can launch tokens and put those out there, or projects can launch tokens and think that that's sustainable. But it's still a thing of, for that token to do well, someone's making money off of somebody. And if it's just a simple thing of you launch a token and once those lockups are up, co-founders and VCs make money off of retail investors and gamers who are prospectively thinking that you're building long-term, when ideally you're just building for a return. It's you're still running into the same problem. So yeah, you might not have the money to compete with a Starbucks or a League of Legends, but that doesn't mean they're not your involuntary competitor. League of Legends tomorrow decides to launch an NFT. then guess what? Then they're doing the exact same thing every Web3 game is currently doing times 1,000. So it's like if the only defensibility mechanism that Web3 games say they have against Web2 competitors or just any project in general is, oh, we're in Web3 and they're not. That's not enough defensibility to save you long term. You might make like gains and your investors might make gains, but short to intermediary gains don't like kind of create long term and sustainable businesses. And that's kind of like the thing that I like think mostly about. But I think it's great to see Starbucks and companies of that size coming into the space, because that means that there's a level of credibility that's being cultivated outside of just we're kind of wagaming everywhere and bringing in every Web2 based Web3 based project. So long term, it's going to be very good for us to see these projects come in. We just also have to take into effect that these are like active competitors and they're not just here to be a part of our growth, but they're going to like here, they're going to be here and then extract for their own sake in terms of building their own communities, cultivating their own communities. As a byproduct, maybe some of their users jump in, but I think long term, they're still going to do their thing.
I mean, I think it's also a question of kind of movers advantage, right? Like, obviously, you mentioned you're kind of competing with other streamers, like be it on Twitch, or your YouTube platform, but still you're in the niche of Web3 gaming, right? Like, you're not going to have like streamers like, I don't know, like Ninja or whatever, just coming on the Web3 games, because for the moment, they kind of don't really believe in it, I would say, maybe.
Yeah.
So it's more the natural evolution of things. And for the people watching this that kind of like don't know much about Web3 gaming, or as a content creator that would want to jump into it, like, what would be your kind of recommendations in terms of someone that's passionate about maybe streaming or gaming and he wants to like explore Web3 gaming? Like, where would you tell him to start?
I mean, I would say first and foremost, start with just playing a bunch of games that are very much like on the market. I think that Elixir Game Launcher is a great place to start. It's like they're building like the Steam of Web3 or one of the Steam competitors of Web3. Poker Starter Gaming has a website where they just like compile all of the Web3 games. Also, following certain content creators is a good start, but start by just playing some games and like getting involved in ecosystems. Don't buy any NFTs. Most of them are crap in gaming. So it's not worth your time buying them and losing money to start, because one thing I've noticed is like, I dive really deep on like user acquisition, retention, and churn. And the biggest indicator of why users churn from Web3 games is they buy an asset in the game and then the asset goes down and they're not expecting it or not knowing what that responsibility is for their investment. So their experience on the very early onset is like bad. So keep them away from buying NFTs until they've like consumed something enough to be like, okay, I like this and I want to dive deeper into this. So I would say just like testing out games, following creators, and getting a good sense of the market. If you're trying to be a content creator, diving deep on a couple of games is going to do you more value than like touching every game in the early onset. Because when I first started, I only played Axie. I don't play Axie, touch Axie, or talk about Axie anymore. And I have my reasons for doing so that I've discussed already. But I was super deep in one game and expanded out. And that's how I was able to really find myself in the space of, oh, you help lead this entire category of gaming. It doesn't happen with you touching 100 different games and thinking you're going to be like, finding your niche in like all of the games, unless you want to do like this thing where you're just reviewing games. But I think that it's super early, and ultimately finding a couple of good games is going to lead you to more value than working with every single game in terms of being a content creator.
Yeah, I guess it's all about like kind of do your own research. Final question, but probably one of the biggest questions is, obviously we mentioned Web3 gaming, but I want to like talk about gamification. When you look at gaming, obviously gamers love, that the game needs to be good, there needs to be a story, etc. When you take overall the whole crypto space, you take a blockchain, you go on the website, it's very technical. There's the white paper. Obviously, developers might love it, but in general, it's very complicated. And with the space, there's a need to simplify things and kind of create a story around it. So how do you think, not only for gaming, but just in general, if you look at creators or even artists that are releasing NFTs, can we gamify this? If you look at decentralized social media, you have, great companies that are trying to launch decentralized social medias. How do we gamify the whole space in general? Like, what would you take from the gaming aspect of things that and that you would love to see? Like, just a final example, like, I like to see DAOs, even though it's not exact, as kind of a guild. Decentralized autonomous organization, someone creates it, he's the guild master. Then in the community, you have like officers, members, and they're kind of getting titles. So that kind of analogy, how do we gamify the whole space to make it more simple?
Well, I think like the biggest area of gamification is user acquisition and growth. And the biggest issue right now, and this is what we're trying to solve at Loopbolt, is there are a lack of users that actually get to see their derived value as a part of being a part of communities. So yeah, you have artists that if your work pops off and you sell a ton of NFTs, you gain recognition, or a gamer in the kind of the same light, or some other form of like Web3. But there's no world where community builders are actually able to see their growth, see what they've done, see the projects they contribute to, contribute openly to projects and the growth of those projects, and be rewarded for it, whether it's in, tokens, NFTs, or some sort of experiences. So, I mean, our thought process is like, where I see the future going is that incentivizing mechanism playing a very important role, whether it's through contests, initiatives, bounties, future work opportunities. And that's what we focus heavily on building. But I think that that's the market where projects are struggling the most, because if there isn't a bull market, projects don't know how to actively, acquire and retain users. If their token or floor price of their NFT isn't increasing, they don't know how to actively retain users, and they also don't know how to keep those users engaged and keep the sentiment of their projects like high. So it's like figuring out those mechanisms is like where we focus our energy, because we know that that is a market where distributed proof of work and actually rewarding those who do a level of work in some sort of way, shape, or form within a community is the only area that, in my opinion, in Web3 hasn't been touched the right way. And it's bigger than just like launching some sort of like bounties or ecosystems to community members, but it's creating a world where community members have some sort of actual proof for showing the work they do. And the traditional world is like LinkedIn. You have your resume and people can see your work. And something like that will exist for Web3 as well.
So what do you think about the future then of like kind of decentralized identities? Because if we go to the gamification aspect, and I take back the example of DAOs, what we could imagine in the future is that you have a member of a DAO or a community. He has his decentralized identity, a bit like a title in gaming, and other people will trust that since this person has this title or these credentials, then you can interact, work with, etc. So do you think that will be gamified through, as we said, kind of like bounties? Or obviously it's in the future, but how do you think we can gamify the decentralized identifiers? Because even just saying it honestly, for someone that's not in crypto, would be like, what on earth is a decentralized identifier, right? So how can we gamify? Should we just change the terms? Do you think that's the issue, or is there a way to explain it in a simple way?
Yeah, well, I think messaging has a lot to do with it. I mean, I hadn't even thought of like the term decentralized identifiers, or I see some companies that are doing it, but I think ultimately the biggest thing is just like, just call it a resume. Like, what is someone's resume? Like, what is your decentralized or your Web3 resume? I think that's going to like kind of yield more results. There's also going to be a world where soul-bound tokens play a very important role in this whole process, I think, one day. But I think that ultimately just showing that, oh, this person has worked with 8 different Discord communities that are like DAOs, and here's the work that they've done across these communities, and it's verifiable on chains. It could be bounties. It could be some other sort of like work that is derived, like, some sort of like prompt work that people are creating and like cultivating. But ultimately, yes, I see a world where this lives. I also see a world where LinkedIn gets involved and they want to be kind of partnered with these Web3 companies that are building these like decentralized platforms for work and communities and creator economy. So I do see a world where you're going to see some sort of integrations there, but credibility on chain is an area where it's going to be huge, and it's something that's really lacking. And the companies that do get that right, I think it'll be a couple, will be able to create a world where creator economy, future of work, future of like jobs are actually aggregated in one or multiple places, and people are able to figure out, okay, if I jump into Web3, I can do these 5 things to get involved and grow within a community, and maybe find a full-time job or find consistent gig work within Web3. So I do think like that is like where we go.
Yeah, just to finish up, it's true that the concept even of having like creator pools, like for example, Brycent with his Web3 kind of resume, you would have your pool, and you could have the members of your community actually being part actually of that pool, and could even invest your token in the future.
Yeah, for sure. Because I mean, think about it right now. The only credibility aspect someone has is Twitter. Twitter is everyone's even decentralized resume right now. Yeah, Twitter is not a good version of it, but like that's all people have. It's, oh, this is where Web3 lives. This is where Web3 interacts. That's going to change over time, and I think that like there are going to be a couple of companies that really get it right. I'm hoping mine is one of those that gets it right, because we're working on this like every day. But I think that credibility in Web3, when it's at a point where it's super fleshed out and people can use it and consume it, it's going to be the biggest way that people figure out who the real strong competitors are, whether it's for community building or smart contract creation, pretty much any field or domain, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's going to be all about kind of bridging the narratives, right? Like right now it's people in crypto, but hopefully in the future we will have simplified things. Well, Any final thoughts, recommendations before we close the episodes? Thank yous or
Yeah.
articles you're excited about? Is there something that you want to say for the last few words before we close out?
Yeah, I'll kind of, I don't like doing it, but I'll give some tidbits on each. I'm really excited for a couple of things in the gaming space. On the sports side, I think STG football is going to be really, really huge. They're building like an arcadey NFL street style football game. I played it. It's dope. When they launch it, I think it's going to be huge. I think the work that IMX and Polygon are doing in gaming is probably at the forefront of like bringing in gamers in a way that makes sense and that isn't super shilly and like malicious. I think that we're also seeing a world where like fantasy sports is going to take off. So any investor that's looking to be involved in an ecosystem that's going to do well long term, I think it's going to be so rare. I think that they can take on like the DraftKings of the world for fantasy sports one day. And they have really sick partnerships with like the MLB, NFL, and a lot of soccer teams. So those are like three, I would say, like areas of that I see like real advancement. And then of course, like my own company, Loot Bolt, I think it's going to be the future of community building for companies and users looking to build things in Web3. So definitely take a look at that.
Great. Well, time to wrap up. Thank you so much for being part of today's forum, Bryce. And
Thank you for having me.
yeah, and if you want to get more involved in our community, make sure to follow us on our social platforms, Twitter, newforum.co. Check out Lootboat, check out Brycent. He's streaming on Twitch. Do you want to remind the audience at what time you're streaming in general?
Normally 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern time, but it varies depending on like what my daily schedule looks like, running the company. But again, Jordan, thank you for having me. This has been great. And you guys are building some incredibly cool things over at NEWFORUM.
Well, thank you so much. And yeah, have a great day.
See ya.